Chapter 5, The Beginnings of an American Identity. Pretend you live in the 13 British colonies, and you are outraged by the attacks on British traders and settlers. You wonder whether it was wise to join with the other colonies, though. Will it mean that Virginians or New Englanders will be able to make laws for Pennsylvania? What do you have in common with the other British colonies? Think, what are some good reasons to join with the other British colonies? How great are the differences between the British colonies? And what separates British and French colonists? Chapter 5, Section 1, Early American Culture. The British colonies were shaped by prosperity, literacy, and new movements in religion and thought. Why that matters today? These forces began to create an American identity that is still developing in our country. Key terms and names that will be defined for you through the Google Classroom: apprentice, Great Awakening, Jonathan Edwards, George Whitefield, Enlightenment, Benjamin Franklin, and John Locke. Please make sure to have out your Google Doc so you can submit through the Google Classroom for homework as you watch this video and progress through the section. One American story. In 1704, Sarah Kemble Knight traveled on horseback from her home in Boston to New Haven, Connecticut. The journey took 5 days. In her journal, Madam Knight described her travel hardships and commented on people she met.
We hoped to reach the French town and lodge there that night, but unhappily lost our way about 4 miles short. A surly old she-creature, not worthy the name of woman, would hardly let us go into her door, though the weather was so stormy.
So let's take a minute and do a SOAPs analysis on the primary source we just heard. Okay, so SOAPs. We want to know who is the speaker, what is the occasion, when and where did this take place, who is the intended audience of the speaker or author of the document, what is the author's purpose, to entertain, inform, or persuade, and what is the subject or the main idea of this particular document. So pause the video, look at the screen, think if you can come up with the answers for each of these questions. Rewind the video and listen to it again if you need to, and I'll be back in a few seconds after you've come up with your answers. Okay, so our speaker of the document was Sarah Kemble Knight, pictured here. The occasion was 1704 in Boston, or when she was traveling from Boston to New Haven, Connecticut. So the general area or the region of the colonies would have been the New England region. Her audience, it could have been just for her. It could have been a journal, or she could have been writing a letter, or it could have been a record being kept for posterity, meaning future generations. Her purpose, I believe for the most part, we could agree that it would be to inform what it was like to travel from Boston to New Haven, Connecticut, and the subject would have been the type of people that she met on her journey. Specifically, this one woman she met outside of her Boston area that she described as, quote, a surly old sea creature not worthy of the name woman. So she obviously was not very fond of this woman. And because the reason she was not very fond of this woman was because the woman, quote, would hardly let us go into her door even though she was traveling and the weather was so stormy. So this would have been very rude at the time because as travelers were making their way, there weren't Motel 6s or hotels or other places to stay. It was considered polite to welcome a traveling stranger into your home, obviously taking safety precautions as well. But this woman would barely help take care of Sarah Kemble Knight here. So, but Knight's attitude towards people from other colonies was typical. In the early 1700s, people from different British colonies did not think of themselves as living in one country. Instead, they thought about their individual colony as their own country, and not all 13 together joining as one. But in this section, you will learn what began to draw the colonies together. Land, rights, and wealth. At the time of Madam Knight's journey, the colonies were thriving. Cheap farmland and plentiful natural resources gave colonists a chance to prosper. They would have had less opportunity in Europe. In England, fewer than 5% of the people owned land. In fact, land rarely went up for sale. By contrast, in the colonies, land was plentiful. Once, Native American groups were forced to give up their land claims. Colonists who owned land were free to use or sell whatever it produced. Land ownership gave colonists political rights as well as prosperity. Generally, only white male landowners or property owners could vote. There were some exceptions. City dwellers who didn't own large pieces of land could vote as long as they were white, male, and paid a fee. Land ownership also helped determine colonists' social position. Unlike England, America had no class of nobles whose titles passed from parent to child. But people were still divided into high, middle, and low ranks as they were in England. Large landholders were high in rank. Small farmers who owned their own land were in the middle rank. Most colonists fit in this category. People who did not own land, such as servants, slaves, or hired workers, were in a very low rank. Colonial women held the same rank as their husbands or fathers. Colonists showed respect for their, quote, betters by curtsying or tipping a hat. Seats in church were assigned by rank, with the wealthiest families in the front pews and the poor people in the back. Despite such divisions, the wealthy were expected to help the poor. Women in the economy. Although women were not landholders, their work was essential to the colonial economy. As you learned in Chapter 4, enslaved African women helped raise cash crops such as tobacco and indigo. Most white women were farm wives who performed tasks and made products their families needed. They cooked, churned butter, made soap and candles, spun fibers, wove cloth, sewed and knitted, and did many other chores. They usually tended a garden and looked after their farm animals. At harvest time, they often worked in the fields alongside men or older children. Because cash was scarce, farm wives bartered or traded with their neighbors for goods and services. For example, a woman who nursed a sick neighbor or helped deliver a baby might be paid in sugar or cloth. Women in towns and cities usually did the same types of housework that rural women did. In addition, some urban women ran inns or other businesses. Madam Knight, whose journey was described in One American Story that we saw in the beginning of the video, sold writing paper, taught handwriting, and rented rooms to guests. A few women, usually the wives or widows of tradesmen, practiced trades themselves. Although women contributed to the colonial economy, they did not have many rights. Women could not vote, and in most churches, they could not preach or hold office. Quaker meeting houses were an exception, where women were considered equal and could actually even be preachers or ministers. A married woman could not own property without her husband's permission. By law, even the money a woman earned belonged to her husband. Young people at work. Children's work also supported the colonial economy. Families were large. New England families, for example, had an average of 6 to 8 children. More children meant more workers. Children as young as 3 or 4 were expected to be useful. They might help look after farm animals, gather berries, and watch younger children. Around age 6, boys were, quote, breeched. This meant they no longer wore the skirt or smocks of all young children, but were given a pair of pants. They then began to help their fathers at work. Sons of farmers worked all day clearing land and learning the farm. Sons of craftsmen tended their father's shops and learned their father's trades. Around age 11, many boys left their fathers to become apprentices. An apprentice learned a trade from an experienced craftsman. The apprentice received food, clothing, lodging, and a general education, as well as a training in a specific craft or business. He worked for free, usually for 4 to 7 years, until his contract was fulfilled, very similar to an indentured servant. Then he could work for wages or start his own business. Girls rarely were apprenticed. They learned sewing and other household skills from their mothers. In New England, girls of 13 or 14 often were sent away to other households to learn specialized skills such as weaving or cheese making. Orphan girls and boys worked as servants or for families who housed and fed them until adulthood. All right, this is the end of Chapter 5, Section 1, Part 1. Please make sure you have completed as much of your Google Doc as you can through this video. And when you've done that and you're finished, we'll see you in class tomorrow.